Neither Joe Flacco nor Shedeur Sanders. Why the battle for the Browns' QB spot is a nightmare for fantasy football. The battle for the quarterback position with the Cleveland Browns has become a nightmare for fantasy football players, and neither Joe Flacco nor Shedeur Sanders offer clarity. The 2025 NFL season has begun with one of the most chaotic quarterback situations, that of the Cleveland Browns. With Joe Flacco as the 40-year-old starter, Shedeur Sanders as the rookie in development, and Dillon Gabriel as the direct backup, the outlook is uncertain and unpromising for those looking for consistency in their fantasy football leagues. The competition has been intense, but far from offering answers, it has generated more doubts than certainties. Joe Flacco, the veteran who is not convincing. The appointment of Joe Flacco as the starter was a pragmatic decision by the coaching staff, but not necessarily the most exciting one for fantasy fans. Despite his experience and past as a Super Bowl champion, his recent performance has been inconsistent. In 2024, with the Colts, he went 2-4, and while he showed flashes of quality, his age and limited mobility make him a high-risk option for any fantasy team. Shedeur Sanders, talent on hold. Shedeur Sanders arrived in Cleveland with high expectations after being selected in the 5th round of the draft. His preseason debut was promising, throwing for 138 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Panthers. However, an oblique injury and a disappointing performance against the Rams relegated him to 3rd on the depth chart. Although the team is confident in his development, his immediate impact in fantasy is virtually nil. Dillon Gabriel, the silent substitute. The other rookie, Dillon Gabriel, was chosen 50 positions before Sanders and has been designated as Flacco's main backup. Although he has not shown, his position in the team makes him an emergency option for fantasy, but without guarantees of consistent production. His role seems more oriented to the internal stability of the team than to generate points in virtual leagues. Rumors and confusion in Cleveland. The situation has been further complicated by unfounded rumors about Sanders, such as the one that claimed he was not even participating in the practice squad. Quarterbacks coach Bill Musgrave refuted this information, clarifying that Sanders does rotate on the scout team along with Gabriel and Bailey Zappe. This kind of speculation only fuels uncertainty and affects the perception of players in the fantasy world. Fantasy football. Danger zone. For fantasy football managers, the situation in Cleveland is a real nightmare. There is no clear favorite, roles are constantly changing, and injuries have affected the development of young talent. Betting on any of the Browns' quarterbacks at this point is a risky move. The lack of continuity and internal competition makes none of them a reliable option. Although the current outlook is bleak, the Browns appear to have a development plan for Sanders. If he can adapt to the system and learn alongside Flacco, he could become an interesting option in the medium term. However, for the 2025 season, it is most prudent to avoid Cleveland's quarterbacks in fantasy, at least until one of them establishes himself as the undisputed starter and shows consistency on the field. Total uncertainty. The battle for the quarterback position with the Cleveland Browns is a clear example of how internal competition can affect the value of players in fantasy football. Neither Flacco's experience nor Sanders' potential have managed to dispel doubts. For fantasy fans, it is best to stay away from this situation until the smoke clears and a truly reliable option emerges. When it comes to fantasy football, managers live for clarity. A clear depth chart, a trusted starter, and predictable weekly performances can make or break a season. But if you're a fantasy football player keeping tabs on the Cleveland Browns right now, you're probably clenching your teeth.
Why?
Because the Browns' quarterback situation has morphed into something resembling a nightmare labyrinth. Neither Joe Flacco nor Shedeur Sanders offer certainty, and that uncertainty ripples across the entire roster. The two names at the center of chaos. The Browns' QB room is fascinating for storylines but disastrous for fantasy stability. On one side, there's Joe Flacco, the veteran Super Bowl MVP whose arm strength and experience still make him a capable plug-and-play starter. He's steady, deliberate, and occasionally brilliant, but age has drained the consistency he once carried. He's like an old pickup truck. You trust it to get you home, but you wouldn't bet your paycheck on it running smoothly every day. On the other side, there's Shedeur Sanders, the rookie phenom with Colorado stardust still on his shoulders. His pedigree, flair, and confidence make him the perfect candidate for the future of the franchise storyline. But right now, he's inexperienced, untested at the NFL level, and more valuable to the Browns' marketing department than your fantasy lineup. The problem for fantasy managers is that both names represent hope without certainty. And when two quarterbacks hover in limbo, the offense around them collapses into unpredictability. The impact on fantasy players. Fantasy managers aren't just choosing QBs, they're also betting on wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends. The quarterback is the engine that drives those skill players' production. When the engine sputters, the whole car stalls. Amari Cooper, boom or bust roulette. Cooper is Cleveland's clear WR1, but his fantasy value depends on chemistry with his QB. With Flacco, you might see a steady diet of short to intermediate passes, especially on play-action looks. With Sanders, the potential exists for explosive downfield connections, but also the very real possibility of rookie mistakes, missed reads, and inaccurate throws. Cooper could finish a week with 7 catches for 110 yards and a touchdown, or just 2 receptions for 19 yards. That's maddening for managers who rely on him as a WR2. Elijah Moore and the invisible factor. Elijah Moore is supposed to be the gadget weapon, the spark plug who can line up everywhere. But fantasy football hates unpredictability. If Flacco leans on veterans, Moore may get overlooked in favor of Cooper and tight end David Njoku. If Sanders takes the snaps, Moore might be his safety blanket, or completely disappear if the rookie forces throws to Cooper. You can't plug Moore into a fantasy lineup without bracing for a goose egg. David Njoku, the one glimmer of hope? Tight ends in chaotic offenses often become the last line of trust. Njoku might be the one Cleveland player to benefit from this QB carousel. Both Flacco and Sanders could lean on him as a check-down option or red zone target. But even then, his ceiling is capped. Without a consistent QB, Njoku becomes more of a weekly TE2 streaming option than the breakout fantasy star managers hoped he could be. The backfield mess. Let's not forget about the running game. With Nick Chubb recovering from injury, the Browns are relying on a committee. The QB situation directly impacts how defenses line up. If Flacco starts, defenses respect his veteran awareness and hold back a safety. If Sanders starts, expect stacked boxes daring him to throw. That means inconsistent lanes for Jerome Ford and company, another headache for fantasy owners. The psychological trap for fantasy managers. Fantasy football isn't just math, it's psychology.